Last of Us Part 2 is a divisive game to say the least. It polarized many players with its plethora of controversial choices, all interlinked to a common theme, the challenge of empathy and the dangers of losing that empathy. Looking through the lens of this theme, the developers' decisions came into clarity for me. We're talking about Joel's death, Ellie's torture scene in the hospital, Dina leaving Ellie. The list goes on, with so many of these centered around one extra divisive character, Abby. Abby is the antagonist of Last of Us Part 2, and as such, she's received a lot of hate. This video is meant to take a closer look into the character of Abby, who she is, what functions she serves within the game, what complaints are levied against her, and what could have been done to soften the blow, no pun intended, of her character. Needless to say, this video will be comprised almost exclusively of spoilers, so watch at your own risk. This is what happened to Abby. First, we need to get the basics out of the way. For those who haven't played The Last of Us Part 2, why are you watching this video? Or it's been a while since you have played Last of Us Part 2, Abby is one of two protagonists in the game. There are arguments to be made that she's the antagonist, but at a halfway point, you play as her as the protagonist, so two protagonists. When Abby was young, her father was murdered by Joel in the climax of the first game in the player's attempt to rescue Ellie from unconsenting surgery. After her group, Abby's group, the Fireflies, is disbanded by this act, Abby finds herself, along with a few friends that are also known as the Salt Lake Crew, deep in the rows of the Washington Liberation Front, or WLF. While the WLF is raging war against a group called the Seraphites, Abby continues to be racked with the pain of losing her father and searches for traces of Joel in the hopes of seeking revenge and finding closure. After years of searching, she, along with the rest of the Salt Lake Crew, do end up finding Joel and head out to enact their revenge. Now, we as a player first come across Abby right before she finds Joel. Her intentions are currently unknown to us as we play as her, getting used to the game mechanics and the setting. She soon finds herself rescued by Joel and Tommy and returns the deed by leading the two back to her hideout, where the group incapacitates Tommy and tortures and proceeds to murder Joel. It's unknown if the rest of the crew took turns torturing Joel, but it seems to be implied that the dirty work here is done exclusively by Abby. Just before she lands the finishing blow, Ellie arrives in time to see her adoptive father take his last breath. The crew then leaves Ellie and Tommy alive, which they see as an act of mercy, though Ellie and Tommy certainly don't see it that way. Afterwards, Abby returns to Seattle to continue fighting for the WLF. She also juggles the pain of guilt for her deeds and finding her friends who keep disappearing. As the player, of course, we know what happened at this point. We, as Ellie, killed all of her friends. Abby also goes on her own personal journey as she is saved by Yara and Lev, two siblings who left the Seraphites due to the group being extremely transphobic against Lev. Abby takes great effort to look after the two, especially Lev, even going so far as to abandon the WLF and see its leader shot and killed in an attempt to find closure for her deeds against Joel. When she returns from that harrowing journey, she finds the last of her friends dead. Abby then confronts Ellie and her crew at the theater in Seattle, nearly killing all of them, including a pregnant Dina, before Lev stops her and the two exit with the threat of killing Ellie should she ever show her face again. We later join Abby and Lev as they search for the remnants of the Fireflies in pursuit of hope, but are captured by the Rattlers. The two are crucified on the beach with the rumored Firefly camp just out of sight across the water before being rescued by Ellie, so that the two can have one final fight to the death as per Ellie's insistence. This time it is Abby who is nearly killed before Ellie finally lets the two of them go. It's important to know that the title screen for most of the game is framing the boat that sits in the fog and water right next to Abby and Lev, who are presumably just off screen. This is all but confirmed by the fact that once the game is over, the title screen changes to a bright, sunny day with the boat beached on a new island with a building off in the distance. This implies that the two do end up making it, potentially, to the Fireflies. With Abby's journey out of the way, we can dive into the various roles she plays within the game. Abby holds this interesting position where she is both protagonist and antagonist depending on where the player is in the story. For Ellie, she is the villain of the story, and it's Abby's actions that are the inciting incident for the entire journey, with the broader story, including Part 1, being argued that Joel saving Ellie is kind of the inciting incident for Abby's start of the journey in Part 2. At the halfway point of the game, Abby switches to the protagonist, with Ellie serving as an unseen antagonist as she kills all of Abby's friends and unknowingly gets in the way of Abby's goal to save Lev and Yara, looking at the hospital scene, for example. In a sense, Abby is another Joel, and this is a good thing. Abby's journey is extremely similar to the one that Joel takes in Part 1. She finds herself in an unlikely alliance, taking care of and developing a deep connection to the person that eventually opens their eyes to the world around them, and they become a better person after having made a tough decision that gets lots of people killed. In Joel's case, he kills all the Fireflies, specifically by plowing through them in order to save Ellie. The many deaths of the WLFs and the Seraphites are less directly on Abby's hands, but it can be argued that her actions are kind of the trigger for these deaths. The developers want you to see her as another Joel too, not just narratively, but mechanically. She plays very similar to Joel, being a hard-hitting brawler who is cold and brutal in her kills. Sure, stealth is an option just like in the first game, but Abby was built for war in a way that is very similar for Joel. I fully believe that if Naughty Dog had implemented skills in Part 1 like they did in Part 2, Joel would have the same skill tree as Abby. This is not an accident. Abby was clearly modeled after Joel for a number of reasons, not the least of which being that players fell in love with Joel through Part 1. The intent here is to get players to really feel that Joel's actions in Part 1 can easily make him a villain to someone else. A lot of people idolize Joel, despite his actions consistently being brutal and cruel to anyone that wasn't part of his crew. Often, his cruelty was justified in the protection of his crew. Now, these actions are called out in Part 1 by Tommy, sure, but it's largely felt justified by the player. Abby being a parallel of Joel forces the player to see Joel from an outside perspective during the first half of the game. They're both vengeful forces who can act quite cruel and brutal when pushed. Her existence is meant to not only invoke empathy for people who we deem to be the enemy, but also gets players to retroactively look at the actions of those they deem a hero and see their flaws. Abby and Ellie are also foils of each other. They are both people radicalized by the world around them, feeding into the us versus them propaganda. Now for Abby, this mentality is instilled by the entire WLF, which is led by Isaac, a very cruel and torturous person. For Ellie, this is notably instilled by Joel, but not the settlement of Jackson at large. They are both hell-bent on revenge as a means of justice. For Ellie, it's having to grapple with the grief of losing a loved one just as the road to forgiveness is starting. For Abby, it's spending her formative years learning to hate a group of people being a good thing, and finally getting an opportunity to seek closure for Joel's actions against her father and family. Each eventually learn to let go of their anger and find closure within themselves after having hit a point of no return, losing much in the process. Abby loses all of her friends and the last living connections to her life with her father and the Fireflies. Ellie loses one of her closest friends and her family in Dina and their shared child. I want to say that they learned their lesson too late, But I think the point of Last of Us Part 2 is that it's never too late to change your mind. While your actions can never be undone, there is no real point of no return. There are actions that will shape the rest of one's life, sure, but it's always possible to change your mind and make better choices. Abby, just like nearly everyone in The Last of Us, is also a victim. Joel's intense act of love for Ellie sent him on a rampage that, as of writing, left all but scraps of the Fireflies. It's not just that Joel killed Abby's father, but his actions in the Salt Lake City hospital completely destroys the community Abby has grown up with. In one night, Abby both loses her father and her home, along with any hope of making the world a better place with a cure. Slight tangent here. It is debatable whether or not Ellie's condition can be synthesized into a cure. For the purposes of Abby as a character, for all she knows, the cure is possible. So, Abby's father was teaching her how to heal. Her father is robbed from her, and her next role model teaches her how to hate instead. And these teachings have repercussions throughout the entire game. Again, see the fact that Abby is the inciting incident of Part 2. Now that we understand Abby better as a character, it's time we discuss criticisms against her. First and foremost, we gotta get this out of the way, her killing Joel, and the added part of feeling no regret for it. So, Abby is brutal in how she seeks revenge. The scene in which Joel dies is genuinely hard to watch. Not just because of the brutality, but because Joel is an extremely well-beloved character. Joel is flawed, but in many relatable ways. He cares first and foremost for the people around him, and he will go to extreme lengths to protect those he cares about, a sentiment many people can relate to. This is played out to its conclusion by the massacre in Salt Lake City Hospital, a decision that Joel made that has caused lots of discussion and some controversy. Is the cure possible? Did Joel just doom all of humanity with this? All of that discussion, it's very intense, but it's a lot more civilized than with Abby. So, back to this. In the world of Last of Us, revenge is a constant threat, so it makes sense that someone would eventually come for Joel. We know from the first game that he's not a good person. He says that himself. This doesn't make his death any less sudden or shocking, however. It's so hard to lose people that we care about, and there was very little foreshadowing that Joel would die. Unless you're one of those people who can look at the E3 trailer and go, yep, that man's gonna die, which in retrospect, it's pretty obvious, but right then and there, it's not exactly. So many players were expecting to continue to play as Joel alongside Ellie for Part 2, but all hopes of that concept were dashed by Abby and her actions. This jumped Abby up to the ultimate villain. And for some, the killing of Joel was enough to stop playing the game, and that is more than understandable. To the second part of this criticism, looking at forums, there's this common sentiment that Abby has little to no regret for her actions against Joel. They say that she doesn't have dreams about it like she does with Lev and Yara, and that shows her lack of regret for her actions. And I will admit, it could have done some good to have one of those dream sequences where she's back in Salt Lake City, her opening up the operation room to, instead of seeing her dead father, find Joel. Or something, right? To give a bigger impact of her regret. But it's very clear when you look back that she does have regret for her actions. Not only do we see through her performance that she gets no satisfaction for killing Joel, and she finds no closure afterwards through all of the game. She's still haunted by her dreams long after Joel's death. She pushes her friends away when they return to Seattle, and she finds herself alone amongst so many people. She then abandons the life that she knows to look after two people who, much like Joel, she sees as the enemy. People who aren't regretting their actions don't act like that. Abby's care for Lev and Yara are proof of her regret. Abby, like Joel, is a deeply flawed character, who doesn't often wear her emotions on her sleeve, so you have to find it through the actions that she takes and through these dream sequences. The next complaint I'm going to talk about is that people are upset that they have to play as Abby. It is extremely understandable to be upset when forced to play as someone who, up to the point from Ellie's perspective, has done nothing but be a villain. And I can easily understand why anyone would want to stop playing at the halfway point when the point of view switches. Honestly, I think that's why the developers put the switch where they did. The game has been building to this ultimate climax of revenge against Abby, and the players finally encounter her at this standoff. And the only way to get to the conclusion of that standoff is to play as the villain that you've been hunting this whole time. Reluctantly at first, sure, but slowly the player hopefully learns what we discussed of Abby in the earlier section. There's also a complaint to be held that you play as her for too long. We get it, we understand it, let's get back to the action. Some players felt like they understood the game's intent long before the game switches back to Ellie's point of view, creating a sense that the game just doesn't trust the audience is smart enough to get it. Now, I don't blame the developers for having such a long playtime with Abby before returning to the theater. It's a tough break, however, in the pacing of the game. Everything slows back down just as things were ramping up. But that's a complaint on the game as a whole, and this video is focused specifically on Abby. There are people who are unable to look beyond Abby's actions. Now, that isn't a failing on them, but honestly, one of the more compelling facets of the character. Sometimes people do unforgivable things. It can be hard to look deeper into the psyche of someone who's done such horrible acts against us as a person, because we might find some nuggets of ourselves in them. It's scary to come to the conclusion that we might do something similar if pushed in the right ways. It's interesting to note that when separated from The Last of Us as a game and all of that, Abby's storyline is often one that's celebrated when the character is the sole protagonist. Think Kill Bill, Blue-Eyed Samurai, countless other revenge stories. The protagonist is deeply wronged by a person and seeks righteous justice against them. It's a classic cowboy revenge tale, you know? The characters are lauded for their revenge. So what makes Abby's storyline so different? Well, Joel is her villain, but he's also our hero. We knew Joel first and developed empathy for him before ever meeting Abby. And that is what makes this game so compelling to me, and hopefully other people. The game plays with the duality of perspective and really digs deep into the concept that no one is a villain in their own eyes. Every person justifies their action within the system that they understand. That system, in this instance, being one of survival of the fittest, to kill or be killed. The last complaint that I want to talk about in this video against Abby is her looks, or her muscles, to be specific. Now, Abby makes a lot of insecure people uncomfortable. She's very strong and muscular, and this is intense for some people. Some will call it forced wokeness, a means of shoving unrealistic strong women tropes down people's throats. Now, these people are wrong and just uncomfortable with a woman who is stronger than them. Others see her as gross for not conforming to gender norms of the small, frail, curvy woman. These people are also wrong and uncomfortable with a woman who is stronger than them. Abby's muscles are actually a part of good character design. She is raised in a world that insists only the strong survive, so she becomes strong. She has no real outlet to deal with her feelings and the trauma she endured back in the Salt Lake City hospital. In her mind, she wasn't strong enough to save her dad. So she pours this stress and guilt into working out, burying her emotions in muscle. If she's stronger, she thinks, she won't have to lose anyone else. Abby's strength also serves as good juxtaposition to Ellie and makes for their last fight to be all the more impactful, because at the beach, Abby has been starved, and she's lost nearly all of that muscle mass she's built over the years to protect herself. Her hair is cut short, her identity is stripped down to nearly nothing. Like me, you might not recognize her the moment Ellie does. And maybe, like me, when fighting in the water, you mix the two characters up. They look almost identical in these wounded and weakened states, and that shift wouldn't have been nearly as impactful had Abby not been buff at first. Now we move on to our final question of this video. What could have been done instead for Abby? Unfortunately, the answer is nothing that doesn't fundamentally change what The Last of Us Part 2 is as a story and game. But for the sake of science, here are some things that might have made it easier to empathize with her character. First off, we play as her more before she kills Joel. Now, this is an argument that I've seen a lot, and it has kind of the most traction, I would say. If we play as her for longer before Joel dies, audiences can be more willing to open their hearts to the character and then have to wrestle with their attachment to Abby and her actions. Now, there are a couple of difficulties with this. First off, The Last of Us Part 2 is focused on the thesis, how does a person learn empathy for someone who is already labeled as the enemy? It's all well and good to be empathetic with people who we see as part of our tribe. The hard part is bridging the gap to understand the human on the enemy's side. Showing more of Abby before she kills Joel puts her more on our side as the player, and it would make it easier to empathize with Abby for sure. Now, according to the wiki, Naughty Dog also toyed with this idea, but they found it too easy for the audience, and they really wanted to challenge the player to get past their bias against Abby. An argument could be made that they made it too hard for most people, and they didn't end up getting the message because they dropped the game. Now, another difficulty in playing Abby for longer is, of course, spoiling her killing Joel. Her story is split into two parts, pre-Joel murder and post-Joel murder. In Abby's flashbacks, we see her focused in on killing Joel, which would, of course, spoil the reveal. It would be hard to keep that a secret for very long. I personally found it very compelling that Abby's quest is a post-revenge one, where Ellie's is a seeking revenge one. Perhaps there could have been a way to intersperse her sections throughout the game a little bit more. Have them be more evenly dispersed, and not have these two characters' stories sectioned off so heavily for so long. However, I fear this might also lessen the impact of the story. In this instance, it is more compelling to see how all of the puzzle pieces fit together after seeing both halves in their entirety. Seeing each day back to back would be a lot. Plus, it would mean replaying the same location over and over. Imagine doing the hospital level from Ellie's perspective and then immediately jumping into Abby's perspective. You just finished the hospital and you have to immediately go back into that same level and play it all over again. The two characters' stories being split more or less in half is just the stronger choice. Another option I hear a lot of players put forth is that she doesn't kill Joel, but instead it's Tommy, or she does something else that earns Ellie ire. I admit that this is thought-provoking, but it just doesn't lend itself to the same narrative weight as killing a hero, as far as the audience is concerned. I mean, we never really knew Tommy when he was a killing machine like Joel, and we don't really see much of him in Part 1, so to try and flesh him out before then killing him might have felt a little contrived, and certainly wouldn't have been nearly as impactful. I guess an alternative could potentially be Abby teaming up with Joel and Ellie for longer before she realizes who Joel is. I mean, this option could have some fun stuff in it, though it makes for an entirely different game that doesn't ask the same questions quite as hard as Part 2 currently does. In conclusion, The Last of Us Part 2 is an intentionally divisive game that uses powerful and shocking moments to push the player to their limits. It's more than okay if you can't find it in your heart to enjoy, forgive, or even tolerate Abby from what she does. The fact remains, however, she is a strong antagonist that, when given the chance, can become a strong protagonist if the player is willing to push past their biases against her. While different choices certainly could have been made in development to soften the blow, it's important to recognize that Naughty Dog swung big and weren't afraid to make the strongest choices they could. And that is not something you really see too often in the AAA landscape. So, that's it. That's the video. Thank you for sticking around and watching all of it. The Last of Us is a series I hold very near and dear to my heart, and I have a lot of thoughts on these games and the show. This video was going to be about the second game as a whole, but it became too long and too hard to fit it all together. So, I'm thinking about potentially making some separate videos on the other characters or complaints on the game. But enough about me. What did you think? Did you agree or disagree with anything I said? Let me know in the comments. And let me know what games or characters you feel are underappreciated. I might make a video about it. Thanks so much for watching, and remember, always look for the light.